So my name is Fred Yentz. Like Patty said, I'm the president and CEO of Telit IoT Platforms. And my objective today, I want to tell you a little bit about me, a little bit about Telit, and kind of what we think about the market. I began my career a long time ago, longer than I'd like to admit actually, with IBM. And I say we've been doing IoT since Token Ring. And those of you who know what Token Ring is can at least date that. We've been doing this for a long, long time. Now the networks have changed. Things have changed very, very radically, but connecting things to apps is something we've been doing for a really long time. Over the course of a few years, we exited IBM with about 100 people. We went out and we had some fun in 2000. So I say we're about a 15-year-old company with about a 30-year history. So now we've joined Telit. That was back in 2013, and some pretty cool things have happened. We've been in this space for a long time. Telit entered the market in about 2000. ILS Technology, formerly IBM team, we're in this market big time in about 2000. And times tick by. And now we're basically sitting here with a global enterprise focused on IoT enablement only. We don't have a wonderfully giant P&L where we can take and change a line item and immediately get billions of dollars in the IoT sector. We actually grew our revenue, what I'll say, one module, one connection at a time. And the reason for this, I think, is to point out to you that it is happening. It's happening very quickly. I had the pleasure of kind of doing this talk for the last 5 years, whether it was an IoT luncheon or an IoT breakfast. And I will tell you that 5 years ago, the room, one, wasn't as full, and most people had no idea what I was talking about at all. And things have started to change. We have about 6,500 customers that make things, everything from connected Audi A8s to find your dog trackers. So the spectrum of things that are connected today are pretty darn radical, pretty diverse. So when we look at the world, it's end-to-end enablement. We're not a solutions provider to the end markets. We actually enable solutions. We don't want to compete with our 6,500 customers. We want to basically get as close to the edge as we can to help people enable smart and safe. And we want to get as close to the application as we can to allow people to do some mass customization on the edges. And we do it with modules. We do it with a global MVNO. And many of the operators in the room are actually suppliers to us on the MVNO wholesale side. And then we do it with this thing we call the platform, or as we brand it internally, our IoT portal. So enough about me. I think it's time to think about the big question. It's time to scale. Are you ready? Now, when I take a look at this crowd and I take a look at the conference and the topics and the momentum that we're getting, whether it's at CTIA or whether it's at Mobile World Congress, I think everybody should take a minute and actually congratulate yourselves as an industry together. I mean, we have come a really long way in just a few years, right? This is a big, big change to the way people can do business. Everybody wants to diverge from being, kind of the dumb pipe or the transport provider to basically stepping up and getting higher ARPU, getting stickier customers, and moving forward. So when we look at this, what's the reason for success? So from the beginning of time, right, what I'll call engineering awareness, a couple geeks thought it was cool. We'll have some machines talk. And back then they didn't even know what to call it that was relevant. We called it machine to machine. I think there was a couple of key pivots. Certainly as I address the mobile network operator community in the service provider space. One of the key pivots was, I think, right around 2009. And at that point in time, there were two big changes that happened, one in Europe, one in the US. AT&T initialized basically a relationship with Jasper, and so did KPN over in Europe. And the idea of provisioning IoT services became more affordable and a higher value to the customers. Because before, people were doing it with some homegrown provisioning engines that weren't necessarily scalable and maybe not cost effective. So this onset of easy provisioning was something that I think really created a level of operator awareness globally that this stuff exists. Now, standards is another thing. Back in 2008, I've been on the board of TIA for a long time. We actually said, listen, we don't want a new protocol or a new method of connectivity for every new thing made in the planet. There's enough fragmentation in terms of standards. You know, I don't want a new standard API set for toasters. You know, how do we get ahead of this and try to put some framework in place to make things happen? And in 2009, at the same time as this pivot point, TIA published the TR50 spec, which is, again, sort of the first step towards some rationalization of the market. We also worked as TIA, and we joined 1M2M following. And again, I don't know that standards is the panacea or the answer, but it certainly kind of is like bumper bowling. It gives us some sidelines to stay in our lane. What happened in 2012, in my opinion, is enterprises woke up. We started seeing a lot more enterprise deals, not just the mega companies, but a lot of the mid-tier and higher tier enterprises woke up and said, listen, I need to apply this to my business. I need to make sure that I can take all this cool information and make it relevant, and there's some tools to do that. And in about 2012 is when the platform market started to explode. We were looking for a new home outside of our parent company. We did a transaction actually in 2013 with Telit. Companies like Exida and others started happening. We went from probably 3 to 5 primary platforms in the world to right now there's probably 300 platforms in the world. So everybody, it's like a gold rush. Everybody wanted to provide tools to make this easier. And now here we sit in 2016, and I call it public awareness. And I have 2 reference points for this. One reference point is I've been in technology for 25 years in the industry, and I'd say for probably 23 or 24 years of that, my family never really understood what I did. You know, I worked for IBM, I made computers, I did communication stuff. He does a lot of business trips, who knows what he does. Try to explain it to him, it didn't make sense. Now, if you're watching any primetime TV, there's GE Brilliant Machines. A few years ago, there was the IBM Smarter Planet, Cisco's Internet of Everything. There are more examples that are driving public awareness of what IoT is all about than I think any other technology shift that we've really seen. It makes people think how their life is going to be different, and it becomes an emotional attachment to what this might do for me. One of those emotional attachments might be fear, and one of them might be extreme joy because I've got a different level of convenience going forward. But there's an attachment. People remember what IoT can bring. Now, families and awareness and mainstream TV is one thing, but let's look at what this smart guy said, chairman of the World Economic Forum. We stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another. The next sentence is key. In its scale, scope, and complexity, the transformation will be unlike anything humankind has ever experienced. Potentially my children would believe that to be true because I know where their car is. It's affected them. They know that there's boundaries and that there's ways that we can attach to look at things to make things safe or add convenience. We talk always about like Uber and Airbnb. It's changing the way businesses do business. It's changing the way people interact with people. And ultimately, it's changing the way we need to think about scale and complexity. So IoT, let's take that second sentence. In its scale, in its scope, and in its complexity. First of all, This touches every vertical in almost everything. There's hardly a thing that may not be connected. There's hardly a thing that wouldn't apply to this space we call IoT. Now, it's not just one network. It's a network of networks. This is incredibly challenging depending on which space you're in. I see I've got satellite people in the audience. I've got wireline and wireless people in the audience. We've got this low power, unlicensed spectrum stuff that makes people really happy and really scared, and questions things around manageability. So there's all this stuff. And then there's platforms of platforms. Man, we heard it throughout the week. There's data lakes, there's machine learning, there's analytics, there's data as a service, there's device management. How are we going to deal with millions and millions of devices out there and manage them? So all of these platforms can get pretty confusing. And quite frankly, platforms to me is a challenging name. I'm on a platform right here. There's a lot of definitions. It's a pretty nondescript term. That's why I think there's 300 of them, right? But technically, it's not getting simpler. As a matter of fact, don't expect it to. If you have a technology that's going to be pervasive across every vertical, everything, touching everybody, my goodness gracious, don't think there's a silver bullet that's going to make it happen. It's simple. There's going to be complexity. Now, in reality, customers don't buy complexity. Customers buy business outcomes. And part of our challenge as an industry is we have to shake this burning desire to talk about how cool it is to make the watch. We need to start telling people what time it is. What's the business value? There's so many ecosystem shows and events and conferences that we get used to talking about what we do that's cool and how we did it. As we see new entrants in the market for IoT, we see companies like SAP. We see companies like Google. We see companies like IBM, Bluemix. These are folks that engage with customers, that actually talk about business value, and they're going to use the technologies that we provide. Now, if it's really complex and it's intensely scalable and it's terribly diverse, wow, I think we all have challenges to overcome and figure out. Just been in the back meeting with some policy folks from AT&T and Verizon. How are we dealing with privacy? Yesterday we had a discussion, the question came up around security. Now these are big topics, but quite frankly, some things that have sensors on them aren't really that important. There might be some interesting data that's gleaned off them, but I really don't care if anybody knows the temperature of this conference room, right? I really don't care on a lot of things that I have this incredible security layer. Now, other things, if I'm driving in my car, or better yet, my child's in her car, the last thing I want is somebody to know where that is. That's my data, that's my reach to that service, and security is going to be very different. We talk about the industrial Internet of Things, we're talking about critical infrastructure. Clearly, security there is going to have a whole different point of view. So, when we think about scale, we've got to think about things a little bit differently. So we're sitting here with this terrible mess on the left, and we've got to figure out a way to get it simple. So I'm going to violate my rule and actually talk about how some things work. Putting on engineering hats and putting on your architect's hats and everything else, you know that you've got to create some layers. And you know what? They're very horizontal layers. God forbid, that's probably why they came up with the word platforms, right? We need platforms and layers and interfaces between them to try to get some sanity in that very scary picture on the left. Now, if we can drive to simplicity, that's interesting, but ultimately, we have to drive to customer value. So we need to have a discussion with customers about what they're going to get by using IoT. And I tell people, if you can't make money, save money, or stay out of jail, don't do it, right? There's got to be some value add there. Now, what does that mean? You know, it's make money is creating new services and offerings. And it doesn't necessarily have to be monetized on the transaction. Maybe it's monetized through better customer affinity or better knowledge of my customer. Save money is operational efficiencies. Think of the wasted time, the wasted space, the wasted capital in the world when you don't optimize. And having real-time data around efficiencies and optimization is great. How did Airbnb get so many available rooms so quick? People opted in, that extra capital. Verizon Share, great example of people putting assets into a pool and being able to use them in quick one-way trips. And compliance. So jokingly, tongue-in-cheek, I say out of jail. But it's about compliance. Your business may not change at all, but the policies may change. We were doing a project several years ago around de-icing of aircraft. You know, Swiss, I forget the name of the company, but they still de-iced airplanes before and after. And the EPA was trying to put in some rules around the collection of the fluid that they de-iced the airplanes with. So they didn't change. They still had to de-ice airplanes and let them take off, but they had to collect it. And not only did they have to de-ice and collect, but they had to prove that they collected it. So there was a compliance element that didn't change what they did, but it changed how they did it and how they reported. We're working with paint booths that are emitting potentially carbons, fluorocarbons. They're not going to not paint cars. They just have to report differently how they're doing it. So are you ready? And I want to thank David Wolf in Accenture last night for the VIP dinner. It was awesome. And I loved this one thing he had on his last slide. It was the third bullet on his last side. Apps, right, are getting faster, smaller, quicker, flatter, and it's the time for the rise of platforms. Because if you don't do this right, you can never keep the velocity. So I'm in the platform business. I love platforms, right? I hate the term, but I understand why. But this is really amazing stuff. This is how we get scale as an industry. So back to this method of monetizing, because all of us in the room, we're enablers for the most part. We need to find somebody that can actually buy our services, create something with it, and actually turn a profit. We have the same objectives: make money, save money, or stay compliant. And it's interesting when you look at operators. I love the operator use case, the mobile network operator use case. In the beginning, and let's talk about sort of phases of awareness of IoT. And I'm very, very glad to say that the operators in the US, they get it. They really get it. You guys are on top of things compared to some of the geographies that we go and sell to. Most everybody creates a way to provision, and then they're like, I don't know what to do with it. We're just going to create hackathons, and we're going to have people building stuff, and man, some goodness will come out of it. Well, first of all, don't bank your P&L on that sector, right? There's a lot of duds before you find a nest, as an example. There's a lot of makers that make stuff, and not all of them are going to make it. But I'm telling you, it's a pretty neat way to start. You get some ideas of use cases. Then everybody said, I bought all this stuff, I can provision IoT. My sales teams aren't skilled in the art of solution selling, so I better have some point solutions. I want to track my dog, find my kid's backpack. I want to find out where my air cargo is. These are end-to-end vertical apps. Telematics, buy here, pay here. There's a handful of telematics apps, Progressive Insurance, Snap Discounts. These are vertical apps that actually can be transacted without a lot of ecosystem help. Now, the problem with this is when you stack vertical apps end to end in this really, really complex world, there's a scale problem. How in the heck, if you have 50 vertical apps end to end, can you manage QoS, billing, all the things that operators do well? They're very good at doing a few things many times. They're a big company. I worked at IBM, I know. We were very good at doing a few things a lot. Big companies are frequently not so skilled at the art of doing many things a few times. So when you're having all these stacked up verticals, that's tough. Now it was awesome. We had an investor relations conference in London a couple weeks ago, and had a bunch of investors and financial guys, and they're learning about IoT and they think it's great. And they said, what's the value of having sort of a platform? I said, what if every stock and company you looked at, you had to go to their website, you had to pull down the D&B from their website, you had to look at their trends, you had to look at their financial reporting, you had to do all this stuff, and you covered 50 stocks in your portfolio, and every one you had to go to a different place. I said, that'd be impossible. I would use a service like Bloomberg. I would use a service that's a platform. It gives you common access to lots of things. It's kind of like building these vertical apps on solutions that can scale, aggregate billing, aggregate QoS, et cetera. Now there's a few use cases out there where I would say there's the big whale. Somebody found the big whale. Whether it's deploying IoT for an Olympic village, whether it's a smart city in Dubai, whether it's Austin or any of the DOT finalists in the DOT Smart City Challenge. These are big, fun, complex projects that have long sales cycles, that are hard to close and predict, and need a very mature ecosystem to deliver on. And if you try to do all three of these things to sort of diversify your plan to go to market, and every one of them is sort of a unique effort end to end, I think you're dead. It will break. The wheels will come off the wagon. So how do we put some sanity under this? And again, I want to just commend the North American operators. They're thinking this way and they're acting this way. But as an industry, we have to encourage this all the way around, because it's not three unique platforms for these. If the platform is solid, quite frankly, you can go across all of them. So you have a couple of key platforms, and bam, you're going to market a lot of ways. And you convince your vertical app people to port their platform or release their platform, or their vertical solution on your platform. And then you get the scale, which is, I think, pretty cool. Now, what's next? I'm hopefully making a case for thinking about architecture and scale in the reason for platforms. What's next? I think for sure it's safe to say growth is coming. Everything is trending that way. This train will not be stopped. How we deal with it is probably going to be the governor on the throttle. I believe as we get public awareness, there's going to be a huge push towards mid-market adoption. And mid-market adoption means you need to be flexible with your tools. You need to enable the system integrator community and the VAR enablement folks. These folks will actually convert and mass customize to bring IoT as a technology solution to their business needs and their business outcome solution. And I'm sure that we'll see, if I'm standing here next year on the stage doing a similar update, there is going to be an ever-increasing focus on security, because that's the side of IoT that sometimes makes people nervous. And it's hard to change buying behavior, and it's hard to change emotional negatives in terms of adopting technology. And we as an industry need to make sure that we inject the right level of trust and the right level of governance to make this not an issue. So with that, I want to say we do give people opportunities to learn more. And we have people coming around from around the world, and we offer a curriculum called DeviceWise University, which it happens to be the name of our platform. But I'd invite any one of you, if you're interested, please see me or write down the URL. Sorry, I didn't have a QR code that you could take a picture, but there are things that you can do to enable yourselves or your ecosystem to bring this to kind of what I'll call a real reality for scale. With that, I want to say thank you. I hope it was somewhat enlightening in terms of what the problems are that we face. We see it. We've been in the market for a really long time. Many of you are here and you're in the market as well, and I think many that I know are in the market are nodding their heads, so they generally agree with the thesis. With that, again, thank you. I hope you enjoyed breakfast. I hope this was somewhat insightful. Bye-bye.